I had this one experience. I was coming back from the beach with my kids and my wife, and they were super tired after a long day at the beach. They were hungry. We were trying to go get them, fast food or something just to like keep them calm. But on the process there, they were just screaming and bitching and complaining about every little thing because they're just grumpy state. And I had to get out of the car and go around to the trunk to grab them something that, my son was like losing his mind over not having, or I don't know what it was. But the moment I like got the thing out of the trunk and I closed it, I was actually standing next to Loyola University, which has this massive green lawn out in the front, right on the coast, BCH, with the ocean right there. And it was near sunset. And I literally stood there for like 10 seconds and just like looked up and kind of just felt the moment. It was quiet for a second. There were no cars driving. It was crazy. But I literally felt my feet in the ground and where I was in this giant earth, like this little thing. And there was something about just that 10 seconds of quiet and just being in the moment. When I got back in the car, all their crazy screaming and all of that literally had no impact on me. I was over it and just understood they're just going crazy. I don't need, because I was getting worked up prior to that. And it was literally starting to affect me where I was getting stressed. And, as a parent, you get to that point where you feel like I'm going to explode. I need to get out of here. But something about that moment just really grounded me. And I don't know if it was the breath work or the environment or whatever, but I can see how just letting all that mentalness barriers and all that down just really, really can reset the moment.
Welcome to the Two Sales Guys podcast with your hosts, Sean Whitley and Matthew Sopiers. What's commonly talked about are the tactics and methodologies for sales professionals. What is less commonly talked about is the stress and anxiety that comes with being a seller. Each day, sales reps are asked to take rejection after rejection, operate in a world of uncertainty and high pressure, and either fail to hit their number or get a higher quota the next year. We'll talk about how to cope with these pressures and what a winning sales mindset really looks like. Sales is often called a performance business, and we'll explore how stress can drive bad selling behaviors, and alternatively, we'll look to experts on how you can manage your mind and wellness first so that you're putting your best foot forward every day at work. We'll talk to professionals in the industry who share the same experiences and what organizations can do to create a healthy, winning sales culture.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us once again. We wanted to kick this episode off by letting you know we've got another tremendous guest here with us today. We have a little bit of his background that I think is quite impressive. And so for over 16 years, Richard has worked as a performance coach in high performance sports with some of the best organizations and athletes in the world, from Great Britain and China. And this includes supporting teams in preparation for 2 Summer Olympic Games, both London 2012 and Rio 2016, as well as most recently the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, where in all those events, he had athletes that had medaled. And currently he sits as the co-founder of the Conscious Life Collective. With that, Richard, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
Really excited to have you here, Richard. And I mean, your resume speaks for itself. And we're certainly interested in getting your take on stress and pressure and how to cope with it, because it sounds like you do that for some of the best athletes and some of the most intense situations out there in the world. So Sean and I thought it would be just a good baseline for our audience to talk just a little bit about what you do with your customers across some of the things that Sean mentioned in the intro.
Yeah, so I don't work in sport anymore. I left sport a few years ago now. And so I work with kind of anyone really. I work in the corporate field, but I also work with anyone, individuals and organizations, and really help people unlock and reach their full potential. And, full potential is such a broad aspect and a broad statement. But it simply starts with kind of personal mastery. Can you balance your rest and nutrition and movement and commitments and relationships? Potential to me and performance now. Performance is an output. So whether you are an Olympic athlete looking to medal, or you're working in the corporate field looking for improved numbers and sales and that kind of stuff, or you're a mother or father or partner and you want to be your best version. Like, to me, that's all the same thing. It's all performance. It's all being your best self, showing up as your best self. And so, yeah, we help people towards kind of personal mastery, leadership qualities. So not just the stereotypical leadership qualities, but how we relate to each other as human beings, how we make decisions, how, all that kind of stuff. And then work with people with flow as well. Like, since leaving, within sport, but I guess my history, the reason I left sport, I gave end of life care to my mother in 2015, and that just changed my life, like on so many different levels. It just woke me up to, one, the fact that I am going to die one day, and what does that even mean? The whole process of end of life, as painful as it was, is such a magical privilege to be part of, and with my father as well. I've done that, and so it really has given me a kind of broader awareness of, wait a minute, what is life about? What's going on here? And from that, my working in professional sport wasn't answering the questions that it used to. And so I was kind of looking for something else. And flow, I guess where flow comes in is, those states of flow is technically described or defined as the ultimate state of consciousness or awareness, whatever you want to say, where we feel our best and perform our best. And so flow is a peak state. And so flow is kind of quite a high performing peak state because we function at a really high level. And, you could relate that to an athlete. You could relate that to a creative, who's working on a project, who just, an artist or writer or whatever, who just in flow for long blocks of periods of time. Or that could be in flow when you're having a conversation with someone, or, making love, or at a concert or whatever. And there's moments where the Flow Genome Project, I'll kind of steer you towards them. Jamie Wheel, amazing. I did some training with them after in my time in the last 5 years. And they're amazing. They're really kind of bringing the science behind non-ordinary states. And there's an acronym, STIR. So selflessness, or an acronym that describes the flow state or peak state. So selflessness, where your sense of self vanishes, your inner critic goes, your sense of personal space is gone. Like, you're just in that moment, not worrying about what you're doing. You're just in that moment. T is timelessness. So time slows down or speeds up. 2 hours can go past in 5 minutes, feel like 5 minutes, or the other way around. E is for effortlessness. So what you're doing is you're just doing it. You're not thinking about it. You're just in it. And then you'll pop your head up, think, whoa. And then R is for richness, information richness. And those moments where you get innovation or creativity or insight or deep knowing. And flow could be on a micro level. So it could be on during the day, where you're just knocking all your tasks out. You're having a great day. You're flying around. When I say flying around, not like overly busy, but just the day is easy. You're noticing nature. You're just, what a great day to be alive. All the way through to macro flow. And macro flow or macro peak state could be, a profound life-changing experience. So that could be at a transformational festival. That could be, again, a sexual connection with someone. That could be at an incredible concert. That could be a psychedelic experience. That could be, all those moments that take us out of ourselves and connect us to something more, whatever that more is, to something more. And I'll steer you towards them. They're a great organization that are doing amazing work in that field. So yeah, I think I've described kind of what I do. And really, I think ultimately, like, the last thing I'll say about what we do is kind of, are you living your fullest expression of a human being right now? For so much of my life, I was not. And the beauty of death made me realize that. And so I think we were talking just before this, the world is in a turbulent time right now and divided. And yet we're all under the same roof. And, can we forgive? Can we show up as our best self, even though the drama is going on? Can we stop getting hijacked, and can we relate to people, whether that's intimate relationships or whether that's professional relationships, in a way that is creative and brings people together rather than divisive? And so all of our work is aimed at that, helping people unlock that full potential.
Yeah, I hear the term flow state more and more often these days. I think it's become popularized a little bit. And I think what's interesting, something you said there was you're living in the moment, which when you have anxiety, you're really not living in the moment for the most part. In most situations, you're usually fearing something that hasn't happened yet. And so I think that the flow state stuff that you talked about is relevant because a lot of times I think anxiety prevents business people, salespeople, et cetera, from doing their best work because they're not in the moment. But I wanted to dig in on the flow state stuff a little bit more with, do people, like, how much of your time is spent discovering people what is their flow state versus like helping them get to that flow state? Because I would imagine like a lot of people don't know what that is for themselves. So like, do you help people go through and discover that or define that and get them into those situations versus, obviously they already know what their flow state is, and it's like, okay, how do we reproduce that more often for somebody?
Exactly that. Everyone has the states that they know that get them out of their head. And when I mean get them out, get you out of your head, quieten that mind, quieten that inner critic. And so some people are naturally drawn towards action sports. Some people are drawn towards music. Some people are drawn towards creativity. And I think kind of we were saying that in the moment, like I think coming back before we describe that, talking about there's only really one of three places we're in. We're either in the deep, deep now, the present moment where we're experiencing this, selflessness, timelessness, effortless, and richness, or we're in the past, where it's kind of more of a depressive area where we're thinking back to painful times or perfect times, or we're in the future, more of an anxious type of state. We're fearing the future or hoping or wishing we were already in that fantastical future. And so, flow will bring us back to those moments, and we all do things to get us out of that inner critic. So that is either a conscious practice where we know that we need to get into nature, or whatever it is, get into nature, writing, art, moving your body, listen to music, whatever it is, or we're unconsciously numbing out. And so that could be binge watching on Netflix, that could be substance abuse, that could be whatever it is, and not to not to knock substances. I think substances are useful with the right setting and attention. So whether that is cannabis, whether that is alcohol, whether that is whatever the substance, and depending on the legalities or whatever it is, wherever you are, there's a conscious practice to that. But I think the numbing, the kind of the no social media is a numbing practice. Binge watching is a numbing practice. Eating is a numbing practice. It could be a numbing practice. And so, first of all, highlighting that, like, what is your default in those situations? And I think if you can bring a spotlight onto what you do is the first place to start. Like, if they're unconscious, then they're unconscious for a reason. Like, they're just a habit, and you're not even thinking about it. And then two, like, start to bring awareness of why am I numbing up around those areas? But coming back to flow, I mean, yeah, you'll either have an idea of what you're doing, or you can start to kind of try things for the first time. I think that we're creatures of habit for a reason. We like to stay in comfort because it's awkward and it's uncomfortable and it's scary to move out of our normal. But the more we can nudge into that fear or nudge into that discomfort, like, life opens up. And life is always going to be this uncomfortable, and there are we like to think we have control. We have zero control. The perception of control is there until something happens, and then the world falls in, doesn't it? But yeah, just does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I think one thing, because we're talking a little bit about fear here, and when we were doing the prep for this discussion, I thought you had a really good definition for fear. I think you shared that with us. Could you share that again?
Yeah, I'd love to claim it. It's not mine. It's Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's a professor. I'm sure he's a professor at Stanford. He studies fear and the fear response and loads of cool stuff like that. But he describes fear. His definition of fear is I just really like it. It's anxiety plus uncertainty. And so uncertainty is the unknown. How are we going to make income tomorrow if we leave our job? This whole year of 2020 has been full of uncertainties. That still is uncertainty. And we can't do anything about that. We almost have to live day to day right now. And so we can make plans, but we still know that that's, it might work and it might not. And anxiety is a physiological state, and that's linked to a set of thoughts or beliefs. And so a physiological state being that we get stress hormones released, we get changes in heart rate, we get blood pressure increase, breathing patterns change. So that's kind of where anxiety plus uncertainty equals fear. And I think if you break it, what I love about it, you can break it down and you can start to see I have control over something here. We don't have control over the external world. We never do, even though it feels like it sometimes, but we have control of our internal physiology. And just simply, taking control of breath is the lowest hanging fruit with a huge impact.
Yeah. I think that was one of the areas we'd love to dig in more on is the breath side. And I think the techniques that you help your customers and anyone else that you've worked with on, because there is no removing uncertainty right now. Mm-hmm. There's unfortunately not answers to big questions about what's going to happen with COVID and when things will be normal. And so I think transitioning to, okay, we know that uncertainty is going to be there. And in a lot of jobs in sales, especially, it's always uncertain what the future lies. You can do a lot to control it, but sometimes outcomes are not, easily predictable. And so I would love to hear your perspective on, what do you do when you start helping your clients? And I think you talked a lot about breath in our prep. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the role in breath and all of this. And then, some techniques or things that you coach your clients on as it relates to breath or really anything else.
Yeah. See breath as a remote control to your mind. Breath is the bridge between our mind and our body. And, something privileged in sport, especially action sport, for some reason it was aerial acrobatic sports that I was with most. But athletes I can talk from my experience. The people I've worked with, men and women, they're so in tune with their body that that's one thing that kind of notice. Between the rest of us, we're so detached from our body. We're cut from the neck down. We're just in our heads, behind our eyes. And so the first thing is to bring your awareness into your body. And that might sound, I'm aware that we're talking beforehand, just tune into your body and all that kind of stuff. We have this incredible organ, this machine, this incredible organic machine that is unbelievable. And so, trying to relate it to real life, we have 3 distinct decision-making areas in our body. It's not just our brain. So we have our gut. Huge research in this field. That's, I think before I go down this road, the yogis have said this for thousands. The yogis, mystics have said this for thousands, forever. But modern science is now kind of, giving some back objective markers to this. And so, if any of you out there are yogis, but the gut, for example, the gut communicates with the brain. There's a two-way relationship between the gut and the brain. For every 9 bits of information, for every 10 bits of information, 9 go upwards. And so there's serotonin release in the gut. So I'll point you to someone called Zach Bush. He's an incredible person, this work in this field. And Dr. Andrew Huberman as well. So you've got your gut, and then you've got your heart. And I'll point you towards the Heart Math Institute. And they've looked at the heart-brain connection for 25 years. And so, again, there's neurons in the heart that are important with regards to decision-making, how we feel and what we're perceiving and that kind of stuff. And so tuning into your gut, tuning into your heart, and tuning into your head are 3 key areas that need to work together. And they're not one is better than the other, but we're kind of learning to use those and tune into those feelings and perceptions. And then breath. So breath is the bridge between those things, or one of the bridges. And so if you think, how we breathe, when we're stressed, we tend to either hold our breath or our breath gets short, shallow, and we enter this kind of chest dominant, anxious, choppy type of breathing. And if you're not sure if you do that, next time you're stressed, tune into that and what you're doing. Probably holding your breath, or you're probably very, very at least shallow breathing. Being aware of that, bringing your awareness into your body and noticing that is one of the first steps. And I think how we make decisions, or most of our time, is up behind our heads. And so we're ignoring our body. And so rather than being in our heads most of the time, can we be in our body all the time? And I kind of link you to something like a pattern interrupt you can do in a stressful moment to start with before you go into a breath practice is, does this inform me or does this affect me? So does this inform me? Is this giving me good data to go by to make a decision? Or is this affecting my physiology? Is my breath rate changing? Am I feeling a rise in emotion? Am I feeling a change in heart rate? It's kind of like all that awareness, somatic experience or somatic awareness within our body. Like they're massive signals that our body is telling us. And so if we can spot that, initially, we can take control of that. Because once we're hit a red limiter, like we're off, we're lost, we're screaming at that person who's cut in front of us, or we're thinking about the worst case scenario or whatever it is. So that awareness is something I encourage people to tune into, begin to build. And then breath work practice, again, has been around forever, pranayama, whatever you want to call it. And now it's being studied across the world in incredible places, and so much stuff is coming out. But the way you breathe creates physiological change in your body. And so simply one thing you could do immediately is begin to breathe through your nose more often. Breathing through our nose does three things. One, it helps us switch into more of a parasympathetic rest, digest, neurological state in our nervous system. So sympathetic is stress, so we get stress hormones, heart rate increases, that kind of stuff. In a parasympathetic state, our body is going into recovery. So energy is diverted to digestion, to immune function, to that kind of thing. So in a healthy world and a healthy day, we'll switch between sympathetic and parasympathetic all day long. We'll switch between stress and recovery all day long in a healthy working nervous system. That's normal. Stress is not bad. Stress is a really good thing. It's a really, really important thing to have because we get projects done, we get focused, we achieve things. When it's a bad thing is when we're stuck in this chronic fibrillation of sympathetic. And so, which I see so often. Now that could be linked to trauma back in childhood or back into past. It could be kind of a million different ways, but it becomes a pattern. It becomes the default. And so controlling your breath through your nose helps switch us into a parasympathetic state. So nasal breathing, be aware of where your eyes are focusing. In a stress state, our eyes have got a short, narrow window of focus. So if you open your eyes up into a panoramic view, or you close your eyes when you're in a stress moment, you're offering your system some, you're trying to override that system, again, helping your body override that system. And then third simple thing to start with would be to control your exhale, or to double your exhale time more than your inhale time. So if you breathe in for 3 seconds, you exhale for 6 seconds. That could be something you could do kind of right now in the moment. And in the moment, like very, very, very in that moment, when you realize, oh my God, I've got this sale to make. I'm freaking out, whatever, or whatever, any situation in life, or, you're worried about COVID or whatever it is, something called a proper sigh. So you could take an inhale, a full inhale, another inhale, and then control that exhale out. And then inhale, really slow control the exhale out for, you could do 3 to 5, 3 to 7 reps of those. That's something to do in the moment to give yourself control back, or to kind of get you back onto a playing field. Does that answer your question? Sorry to waffle.
I love it. I think I read something about how children tend to breathe better than adults. They are doing proper diaphragm breathing when they're younger. But then at some point, I think as we understand anxiety, or as kids, at some point, when you're a teenager, you start to understand anxiety, you start to plan, you start to think about the future. Whereas most little kids kind of live in the moment. They're not really thinking about much other than what's kind of right in front of them. And I read something about at some point when that happens, we stop breathing through our stomachs, and then we're just kind of breathing up here a little bit. We stop breathing through our nose. And, I think breath is one of those things that's just overlooked. I know myself, I've been stressed out, and it's even really hard when it's obvious you should control your breathing. I have someone telling me, hey, take some deep breaths. When you're all worked up and stressed out, it's you almost can't, or you don't want to. to. And, it's something, though, I think just being more aware of it, thinking about it a little more is probably going to have like a bunch of impact, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of the people that Dr. Andrew Human works with is special forces. And so, arguably they're in some of the most terrifying situations possible. And, it's not, I can listen to him speak, it's not necessarily about, oh, you need to come back to a state of calm. It's about getting something you can take control of right now. So if that means, right, I can focus on slowing my exhale out, you can take control of that right now. It doesn't mean that you might be back to baseline or anything like that, but you have something to hold on to, because if you don't have something to hold on to, you're just going to escalate and spiral out of control into a panic attack or into wherever you're going to go. I think linking back to kids, my daughter's nearly 3, and what an education it is for me to see her and see how children deal with emotions. They let it out, you'll see her like lose it, but she's just letting it out without edit and all that kind of stuff, and then she's done, and then she's back to normal. She's back to, right, let's go and do something, let's go. Like, it's completely past. There's no holding on, there's no resentment, there's no yet, of course. But I think what I learned from that is that, one, we as adults are told to suppress our emotions. My understanding of the body now, and what I've been through the last 5 years, is that our body is like a library of everything we've been through. And so that could be, trauma, emotional, physical trauma as a youth, extreme trauma. It could be you fall off a bike and hurt yourself. And if we don't let that out, if we don't get it out, it stays in our body. And so you imagine a lifetime of 20, 30, 40 years of that, 50, 60, whatever, it's in our body. And so that begins to run us on almost like a default. So those programs that we learn, that pain, and that programs are almost, see it like they're on a floppy disk. When we're adult, we're using smartphones and using the cloud and that kind of stuff. And we might go to, we might see the floppy disk. We think, yeah, I keep reacting to that. I can see it. I could react in this situation, or my default habits are this, but we can't understand it anymore because it's held within our body. And I think, going on a bit of a tangent, but breath is one way of unlocking that. Breath is a form of energy release. And I mean simply an energetic release. Like, if you start to breathe faster and deeper than normal, you're loosening energy, you're loosening, you're getting the circulation going, all this kind of stuff. And I think it is, I guess, going into more of the esoteric world, but that's also being studied now with really quite interesting objective data. Johns Hopkins University is doing some great stuff. Imperial College is doing some great stuff in London, with anxiety, depression, and using different states to heal.
One perspective that I feel is like, the older we get, the more we think we know what we're doing, right? We think we're more educated, or we've experienced it. So therefore, like, our minds can control the situation more. And maybe this is just like subconsciously you feel that way when, out loud, I may not be able to admit that because I know I'm not in control. But it's like, the example I have is like a golfer. So I don't know, me and Matt used to golf a lot. And when we'd go with long periods of time between playing rounds, we'd somehow come out that first round and play really well. And usually it has to do with, you're just playing off of muscle memory, or just letting it happen with the flow, versus your brain trying to tell you like, oh, I need to correct this little adjustment on my swing and I need to go a little faster. And then, of course, you don't have that mastered. And so it's all over the place. And I think that's a similar effect in what you're talking about with like the kids versus us, is that we have all these mental constraints in the way that are causing us to think like, okay, I need to suppress it, or I need to control it, or not be so emotional, or whatever it is. And therefore, you're not just letting that energy happen as a release or as a moment, whatever it may be, and then it's done. And so, like you said, then it compounds and builds up. And just, it's like, we need to have our, like you said, floppy drives like reset. Let's have our hard drives reset. And so I think for me, like, breathing, like, I had this one experience. I was coming back from the beach with my kids and my wife, and they're super tired after a long day at the beach. They were hungry. We were trying to go get them, fast food or something just to like keep them calm. But on the process there, they were just screaming and bitching and complaining about every little thing because they're just grumpy state. And I had to get out of the car and go around to the trunk to grab them something that, my son was like losing his mind over not having, or I don't know what it was. But the moment I like got the thing out of the trunk and I closed it, I was actually standing next to Loyola University, which has this massive green lawn out in the front, right on the coast, BCH, with the ocean right there. And it was near sunset. And I literally stood there for like 10 seconds and just like looked up and kind of just felt the moment. It was quiet for a second. There were no cars driving. It was crazy. But I literally felt my feet in the ground and where I was in this giant earth, like this little thing. And there was something about just that 10 seconds of quiet and just being in the moment. When I got back in the car, all their crazy screaming and all of that literally had no impact on me. I was over it and just understood they're just going crazy. I don't need, because I was getting worked up prior to that. And it was literally starting to affect me where I was getting stressed. And, as a parent, you get to that point where you feel like I'm going to explode. I need to get out of here. But something about that moment just really grounded me. And I don't know if it was the breath work or the environment or whatever, but I can see how just letting all that mentalness barriers and all that down just really, really can reset the moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say, that to me, I would describe that as a peak moment you had there, a flow state, whatever you want to call it, like that moment of connection to something bigger, nature, your breath, and gave you perspective and kind of reset your on a physiological, probably reset your nervous system, but the more you were getting perspective, you could see beyond yourself.
Well, and I think in the work, I think back to work, Sean, how many executives, business professionals, et cetera, do we know that go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, literally 8 hours of fucking meetings without a break? How could they possibly be by hour 6 productive, non-emotional, in their best position to listen to the group, to provide good insight, good advice? I just think sometimes culturally we don't set people up for success because the nature of more, faster. And we don't make enough time for what Sean talked about there, which is kind of grounding yourself. I think that's going to have an impact. And I think it's good that there's more companies talking about this stuff, because I think we'll start to realize that by doing something as simple as what Sean just shared, we can change a lot of things in the way that we work with each other, all the way to the results we produce as businesses. So I thought that was awesome, Sean. It's a good story, man.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by Teachable. Are you an expert at something? Then why don't you share what you know? Create online courses and coaching services and transform your experience and know-how into a thriving knowledge business. Or are you looking to learn from a master of something? Then why don't you check out all these amazing online courses from masters of hundreds of different topics? If so, then head on over to the2salesguys.com/teachable. One of the things that I really wanted to talk about that I think is fascinating, I mean, it's similar to my experience, is you working with athletes, high performing athletes in the most intense situations. I mean, in our prep conversations, you talk about Olympians train so long to have to get to this peak state for one, main event, basically the Olympics. Have you had any interesting stories, maybe not specific with Olympians, but in general, where the athletes had these crazy situations thrust upon them, whatever it may be, whether they made a mistake or they had to recover, or just the immense stress and pressure got to them? And how did you guys work through that? Was there any particular, we just want to hear some interesting stories about anything that they've maybe have been through with you.
Yeah. I mean, all the time. It's never a smooth pathway, and I think the big things come up are injury. How do you manage injuries? How do you manage pain? How do you manage the anxiety that comes around that. And I think kind of one incident stands out of one athlete I work with, and this was, I think, we were 10 days out of the London Olympic Games, and she was nursing a knee injury. But she could compete, but she was managing it, and she just left the ice on for too long, and then got a huge burn. And this was a diver, so she had to get it wet. And so the medical side would say you can't get it wet for a few days, and they're like, well, I've got the Olympics in 10 days time. And I think kind of, that's when it comes down to the special nature of it, of all of us as human beings. Not, the best in the world can access this more often, but I think this capacity to step through adversity and to know that we have the capacity to do that. We're not special. Every single one of us has got that capacity. And I think we're wrapped up in cotton wool far too much, and sometimes, and we push too hard more often. But I think to trust yourself, I think 10 days out of Olympic Games, you've done everything you possibly can. Yes, you can still practice, you can still put more stuff in, but to know that if you're that close to a major competition, probably not going to improve much more in that time. It's about keeping yourself sharp and trusting the process of what you've done. It's not ideal, of course, but you're there, you've done it, you've made it. And I would say in some way that forced that person to rest a little bit more. And she was quite a unique person. But I think one of the messages that I try and get across is that, what these people do in the environments that I've worked in, what they do is extraordinary. There really is just outstanding. You have to just Google any slopestyle athlete or any diver or anything like that. But what underpins that, the qualities that they have, is really quite simple. There are some, growth mindset. So they see the best in the world, see every obstacle that they come across as a challenge and a learning opportunity. Certainly with injuries, they provide opportunities to work on your weaknesses. And there's always a lesson in something. There's always a lesson. You could either always perceive it as a problem and be a victim all the time, or you could perceive that as, okay, what am I going to learn from this? They have clear goals, so they know what they want, know what they're doing and why they're doing it. So they're completely bought into the process. They know exactly what they're getting from this method or that method or this process or whatever. They get immediate feedback. So, if you're a snowboarder and you're jumping, if you land, you've landed it. It's quite immediate. But they've got video footage. They're always getting feedback from a variety of different places and understanding the impact that they're having. I think linking back to the corporate world, certainly my experience of the feedback is maybe annually. It's late. You're not going to know when you're going to improve it. So how can you create a feedback loop with someone that you trust to bounce ideas off, or to know kind of what effect you're having? Or, I always think that to personal relationships, how often do we get feedback from our loved ones, from our partners, and not in a way like, you're opening this up in a loving context, not like, don't slam me, but you're opening a pathway up to create conversation that, okay, I want a relationship to grow. What do I need to work on? Or what do you see? What unconscious patterns do you see of me? They're process driven. So yes, they want to win a medal and they want to achieve things, but they can't control that. What they can control is their process, and they can make that as watertight as possible. So obviously physical training, nutrition, recovery, mindset, all those simple things, their process on the day, their warm-up protocols, their music they listen to, all that kind of stuff. Certainly with snowboarding as well, or most sports, you can't control the weather, you can't control the other athletes, you can't control something just changing on that day that you didn't expect. But it's about managing yourself and trusting what you've gone through. Link back to the example of the burn. Her process was really, really good. She didn't end up medaling at that games, but she did everything she could, and I don't think that really changed anything.
So similar parallel with sales, going into a big sales meeting, right? You got a big customer meeting, a big deal. I think what you're talking about is an interesting parallel of if they feel fully prepared, they look at the process they've put in place of all the things they need to get up to that meeting. They can't control a lot of the external factors. So knowing that should help with them, the anxiety they may have going into that meeting. But one of the other things, like I know you've talked a lot about that athletes do that I think sales professionals need to do a bit more of, it helps with the getting into the flow state, is about visualization. You talk about athletes going into an event and how they visualize their success, how they visualize the moves they're going to make. And in sales, you do a lot of that with role playing and preparing, rebuttals and things. But could you talk to us a little bit about the power of visualization?
It's massive. It's huge. Every athlete is using it now. It used to be just a few, and it used to be considered as kind of I don't know, a bit fluffy, I think, but kind of visualizing. Like virtual reality has been used with skiers now. I know, and so they're actually in Formula One as well. I did a little bit with. They're visualizing the corners. They one uses simulators, but two, they close their eyes in the car and they're visualizing every corner. How does it feel? They visualize taking not just. I hope this works out. Like they're visualizing it as they're doing it perfectly, how it feels, what it looks like, what they need to do. Like they're actually living it in their mind before they do it. And, the science of that, I point you towards Dr. Joe Dispenza, which is one person, maybe not in high performance, but the power of visualization and the work he's doing with healing is incredible. But I would say, when you think of something, again, thinking back to you're either in the past, you're either in the future or in the present now. When you're thinking something, you're reliving that experience. So if you're worried about an event that has happened or that is about to happen, if you're worried about it, then your body has having a stress response because you're thinking about, I'm worried about that, I don't want it to happen, but you're really feeling it. You're feeling that in your body. And so if you're preparing for a sale, thinking how does that, trusting what the content that's going to come out of your mouth, don't overthink that, but also how does it feel to have that conversation? How does it feel to make that sale? How does it feel to create that connection with that person that you're talking to? Kind of really sitting there and thinking about it. And if you've never done this before, then it's going to be scary to try it and it might feel silly and it might feel whatever. But the practice of this is so, the best athletes in the world do this and they get results. And so again, like what the best in the world is just an output. And so best practices of people who are excelling in things, I find interesting. And I would point you towards that if that's something you haven't done before, or just even, if you do have to have a difficult conversation with your spouse or your children or whatever it is, like, how do you want that conversation to go? Because if you plan it beforehand, you're less likely to get caught up in the emotion because it's probably going to be emotional.
Yeah.
But you're thinking about how do you want the conversation to go? What's the true message you want to get across? I was worried about you. I care for you. I love you, rather than I'm angry at you because you did this, like emotional response, rather than the core meaning underneath it is care and it's love, isn't it? Most of the time, or fear or whatever.
We were talking a bit about, going into a competitive moment. I think on the flip side, I'd love to talk about coming out of a competitive moment. And I could use the advice from you because this week we just had a deal that we didn't win as a company that was a very good deal for us as a company. And we just got the news recently, and that happens a lot in sales. We don't get the outcomes that we want. And I think it's just as important to manage our mindset and, what to do in those situations when we don't get the outcome. And I can imagine in your line of work, both now and in the past, you've had to have conversations after someone worked their ass off for years. The Olympics only happen every 4 years, and and they don't get the outcome that they wanted, and that can be demoralizing. And so I think it would be great just if you have any advice or examples or things that you do to coach people or help them through, when they've prepped really hard and they don't get the outcome that they were hoping for.
I think first of all, it's important to feel the suck of that, don't bypass that moment because it's a real emotion and it's a genuine emotion. There's a really amazing woman called Dr. Gilbert Taylor, and she is a brain scientist. But I mention her because she had a stroke, and she saw from the inside what was happening. But anyway, from her research, she come up with a 90-second rule. And so feelings are a genuine hormonal physiological response for 90 seconds. So don't suppress them, allow them. Like, it's going to suck if you haven't achieved what you've been aiming for. It's just the way it is. And it's an important part to feel. But then when the time is right for you, begin to think, okay, well, what went well? Like, there's always things that went well, and there's always things that you can work on. And I think it's easy to focus on what didn't go well, but what did go well? And you just can't win everything. The best in the world can't, like Michael Phelps was beaten, God, thinking of all the best, like, I don't know if you've seen an amazing documentary. I loved it. The Last Dance, about the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah.
There's so many life lessons in that. So many, and they didn't win every game, but the best in the world are win on a consistent basis. And you can't get to that level without mistakes or without losing or without lessons. You just can't get there. You just can't do it. And so there's always a lesson. I think that's nurturing that growth mindset. When the time is right, begin to start to have an objective look at what really did go well, what did we do well, and what didn't go well. Sometimes it might need a hard talking. Sometimes it might just be, listen, we did everything we had planned and it just didn't come off, and there's nothing we could have done. And I think that's come out a lot in sport. In the environments that I've been in, it's just like we did everything we could. There's nothing we'd have changed, and they're just a better person won on the day for whatever reason they just did. And that's it. It's hard, I don't think there's any way of softening that, but there's also something you can really take.
Yeah. I when I got the news, you usually get it via email. Hey, we're not moving forward with you anymore after months and months of working your butt off to try to get the deal through. And I think my 24-year-old self, and even really I did it now, but you react to that email right away, right? Like, and the reaction when I was younger would be to respond to that email right away. The reaction now is to put the phone down, say a few curse words out loud.
Great.
A little pissed. But then I waited for a day. And then what I did after the emotion had subsided is I dropped a note back to the customer saying, hey, it's bummed that we didn't earn your business, but would you be willing to take a quick call with me just to tell us what we could have done differently as an organization in the process, right? And I think now the emotion subsided and I'm not mad at the customer anymore. And I can go back and observe and learn from the experience, figure out what we did well, to your point, figure out what we can do better. So I think that's good coaching. And I think that salespeople all around the world can, take that as an example for how to deal with the losses, because it happens a lot in our line of work.
Considering, like, we have all these different things we talked about, like going into these competitive situations, coming out of these competitive situations. When we look at the business organization, like, what do you think is the biggest shift that companies need to make in terms of like how they run their business or help their employees manage stressful situations, especially right now with COVID-19 on top of all of that? What do you think is that biggest shift that they need to make a change on?
There's a couple of things that stand out to me. The first one would be, so you said coming into periods and coming out of stressful situations. I think, can you periodize that? Periodize is maybe a sporting word, but can you plan for that in the year? So you've got, if you look at an Olympic athlete, you've got a 4-year cycle, and within each year you've got major competitions within that, and at the end of the 4 years you've got the Olympic Games. So then you break that down to the years, and then whether you've got World Championships or whatever it is. And then you've got your periods through that year. Then you've got months, days, weeks. And so you can plan for the intensity of what that person is to go through. So, for example, you plan a training camp. So I liken that in the business world could be, you need to prepare for a pitch. That's your training camp. You're prepping for that high stakes moment. And then that's going to be stressful, and that's going to be, and it's only the experience that I've had with corporate, you're preparing for a pitch on top of your day-to-day job. And so you've got an extra workload, you've got cognitive loads, and your mind is getting like even though you're sat there doing nothing all day, you're under stress, like an actual stress, and stress has buckets: family and relationships and work and exercise and all of that, food, as is a stress. And so can you plan periods of time? Maybe you can't plan it leading into it, but can you plan to come out of that pitch period of having some quality downtime? Is that possible? Or if it's not possible, how can you make that possible? Because otherwise it's just stress on top of stress on top of stress on top of stress, and at some point there's something has to break, and it probably won't be the business; it will be the human being at the end of the day. And I think that's the second thing, like treat people. What I see, the biggest difference between sport and corporate is that sport they're very tuned into their humanity. They're certainly, again, the high level risk taking of action sports is they're aware of their mortality. And I think connecting in the corporate world, connecting people to their humanity is numbers and everything are great, but you're still human, and you have emotions, and you have families, and you have fears, and you have desires, and all that kind of stuff. And when we're optimal, when we live in our full potential, we are the most creative. We can be so incredibly creative and innovative and connecting, in a team. But it's easy to knock that off. And I think if we're doing jobs that whether we're doing jobs we're not interested in, or we're just burnt out, and we're burnt out because we're too fearful of saying, I'm struggling here, I need a hand. And that's a cultural, that's a big thing to shift, isn't it? But it's, I think I said in the prep talk, like, the best teams in sport anyway, like all of this stuff is out on the table. Doesn't mean that everyone's best friends. It just means everyone has that unified goal in mind, and everyone wants to be Olympic champion or whatever it is. And so, like I said, everyone's not best friend, but everyone has their thoughts out on the table, and it's a safe space. You can put your hand up, and I think leadership, and certainly something that we focus on, is how empathetic are you? How much do your staff really believe that you care about them? And how much do you pay interest in what they do? How much do you hear them when they are actually talking? And I think that ties into the power of a positive no. Great book by William Ury. But like how most of us say yes too often, and for three reasons: we avoid it, we procrastinate, we put things off, we accommodate because we're trying to get people to like us. And once we've done those two, we're burnt out, and so we attack. We fire hose people with what you've done wrong and what this has happened, all that kind of stuff. And they're the symptoms of not saying no. And the best people know when to say no, and they know what they've got on their plate, and they know how much they can tolerate. And when they've reached that limit, they delegate effectively, and they trust their team. I think that's another thing with sport. Like they complete trust in themselves, complete trust in their staff, complete trust in their teammates. If it's a team sport, absolutely complete trust, not stabbing daggers in people's backs. Of course, that happens in sport as well. Don't get me wrong, but that's why those teams don't win. And then I think, I think they're the things that you can take from sport, or the biggest shift I see in companies. Generally speaking, of course.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty big transformation that's going to happen with how companies think about this. And I think it's already happened. I think in all fairness, I think you see companies putting in an effort to invest in things like gym memberships to make sure that their people are taking care of their body, healthy food options. I think that's all kind of on the same path of we got to take care of our people's wellness, both, physically and mentally. And I think there's going to be more and more companies innovating in this space and thinking about it and creating those safe spaces that you talked about. And, I'm hoping that it happens and that companies embrace the concept. And I think Sean and I with the podcast are hoping that we don't run into too much friction on trying to break the sort of tough guy culture, tough guy, tough girl culture in sales that exists a lot of times.
Again, I'm not in that world, but I think that has a shelf life now. I think levels of stress are just going through the roof. And I think you can maintain that for so long. And I'm sure, I know the people I know in corporate world, like everyone knows people who've burnt out. Everyone knows people who have broken. And that's going to become more and more. And everyone knows people who've broken who they perceived couldn't break. And it's like, whoa, like they're struggling. I think kind of, I wanted to say something before I didn't say it, but like even starting and ending your meetings with a breath practice as a group, as a team, whether that's on Zoom, whether that's obviously not in person at the moment too much, but because it creates a boundary from what's happened before that meeting. It creates a space. So you're all doing a unified thing before that meeting. And then you're entering into that meeting and out of that meeting with something that's helping you on even if it's 2 minutes, even if it's 5 minutes, just starting and ending a meeting like that, I think has huge power.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that when we were talking about breath, and I've never done that before, but I'm going to be interested in the response I get. Like if I have a team meeting tomorrow and I say, hey, all right, we're going to do something before this meeting. We're going to do some breath work. I can already almost imagine the kind of response that I'm going to get. But I guess that's part of like being innovative and doing something is we're going to have to go through those weird, awkward moments and, let people kind of see for themselves. Sean, like, what do you think, man? Is it like, are we asking too much? Like, can you as a manager in sales force your people to do breath work before a call as part of their job?
I mean, managers think they can force their team to do anything, anytime, right? So yes. But look, I mean, the way I look at it is everybody's on their own journey and at their own point of like openness to new things. And I think if we lead with some information around like, look, this is where I'm at. This is what I've been going through. This is how it's infected and helped me. I want to have this become part of my team's practice because I feel like it will help you. And at the end of the day, I'm here to help you get better, be your best self, as you said before, Richard. So I'm going to implement this. You can participate or not, but I'd be honest with you, give it an honest try. Give it a shot. Let's reflect and see how you feel. And if you think it's not for you, then move on. But here's all the data that I found and the personal experience that I found of how it's helped me. Let's go. I mean, that's just the way I would position it.
Great. I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you completely. Like, everyone is on their own journey, but you can just, making changes is a science in itself, isn't it? We're all at different points along those and different areas of different change. And I think that's a really nice way you put it. At least it's creating a moment of silence. So whether they're activating in a breath exercise or not, there's a moment of pause. And they could use that, or they could be looking at a screen or whatever. But it's up to them. But at least there's a moment of pause before going into that next.
And one other thing, on a previous interview we talked about, for me personally, standing on my feet while I'm on calls and things like that helped improve my ability to focus. Whereas Matt had the experience that it actually caused him to be speaking faster and a little more anxious or, accelerated in his approach. And I think the result of that example was we agreed that, everything doesn't work for everybody. They have to find their thing, what works for them. And so if breath work, if silence, if whatever we're trying to put in here, half the group finds it works for them, the other half doesn't, that's fine. You've at least now moved one step closer to finding what does work for you.
Perfect. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Before we get into where we can find you, Richard, because I know, there's probably a lot of people that we work with or listeners here that would benefit from the work that you do. I'd love to ask you just like a recommendation on books. I know you quoted a bunch of people here. And so any books that you would recommend for people out there that are, looking to learn more about things like breathing and wellness and, the connection between the mind and the body and kind of everything we talked about?
Yeah, for sure. 3 amazing books. The first one is called Breath by James Nestor, Nestor. Really wonderful book. Just basically, he's going through his own journey with it, and there is science in it, but it's very easy. It's written for the layman, so it's very easy to understand. A really nice book, really easy to read. The second book is Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler. Jamie Wheal is the director of the Flow Genome Project. that is a look at non-ordinary states and how the benefits of using altered states to achieve great performance, to achieve better well-being, to give you an insight into, as he describes it, the capital M of more of life. And it's written in from a scientific point of view. So it is talking about non-ordinary states, but in a very educated way. It's a really wonderful read. Exciting book, that one. And then the third one is called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And that's simply the new science of psychedelics. And that has breath work in that book as well. But again, it's his own journey going through that. And I think that all those books are amazing on their own way. And they all touch the topic of altered states and non-ordinary states. And I think the Western world, my understanding and experience now in these last 5 years, like the Western world values, well, it's stealing it from anthropology. It's a monophasic in culture. So we value kind of very limited states of consciousness, our alert problem solving. So the coffee culture, the happy hour, that kind of stuff. We need to be focused and we need to be producing and we need to be optimizing. Whereas you've got indigenous tribes who are polyphasic in nature, where they value lots of different states of consciousness or awareness. So that could be trances, dream states, whatever it is. There's a whole variety of different states that people get into where they value, and they don't necessarily take them as gospel truth of what experience is, but they offer so much value with regards to experience of life. And so those books cover that in a really well-educated, scientific way.
For the sake of our audience, I'm sure, like Matt said, some of these folks would want to connect with you or learn more from you, read any sort of content you may be sharing. So where's the best place for them to find out what you're up to and get a hold of you?
Website is theconsciouslifecollective.com. I'm sure you have the link to it. And then in Instagram, The Conscious Life Collective. And then got a YouTube channel where I do, and a podcast, the Conscious Life Podcast, just simply talking about breaking a lot of this stuff down into simple 20 minute kind of clips of very simple wellbeing practices, personal mastery, whatever you want to call it. And then LinkedIn, if you want to check me out on LinkedIn as well, Richard Husseini at LinkedIn.
Excellent. We honestly really appreciate the time. We think this kind of conversation is super, super fascinating, and there's a lot of interesting techniques and principles that you laid out today that I think can be easily adopted. And there's a few that I have mental notes on, just from the first one of is it impacting me? Like, is it information or is it affecting me, right? Informing or affect. So I think looking at a situation and being able to put perspective on that, that's something I'm going to definitely harness a little bit more. So thank you very much for being on here. Appreciate the time and all the wisdom you shared with our audience. And thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great. Thank you.